Whenever the topic of real jazz guitars and real jazz tone comes up, then I always have to think of this guy. And of course, I'm talking about Ed Bickert, which is certainly one of my favorite guitar players. And this solo demonstrates why in quite a few ways, with him playing a lot of blues on a standard, using amazing chord voicings that are really unusual, and also being really creative with how he's using the melody in his solo. I don't know if it's because he's from Canada that he's a little bit overlooked, but if you don't know his playing, then you are really missing out. And I have definitely been looking forward to making this video. The solo is on Just Squeeze Me off the Paul Desmond album Pure Desmond, with Paul Desmond on saxophone, Ron Carter on bass, and Connie Kay on drums. And of course, Ed Bickert on guitar. There are three things that this solo illustrates very well about Ed Bickert's playing. But a part of what is genius about this specific solo is also that it is an incredibly simple song in an incredibly medium tempo. They play the song in E-flat major, and it's an AABA form with an A part that is mostly just staying around the tonic, just moving up and down stepwise in diatonic chords to pretend to have some harmonic movement. And you'll see Ed Bickert interpret the harmony of the A parts very freely. The B part is what is usually referred to as an Ellington bridge. It's of course also an Ellington song, which means that it's a 2-5 to 4 and then 5-5 and then a 2-5 back to the 1 in the A part. Something you'll find in lots of songs like Honeysuckle Rose, So Danzo Samba, Sunny Side of the Street. It's a very common bridge progression and therefore also good to be familiar with. It starts out his solo with a chord and then immediately goes for some solid blues licks. So really just basic E-flat major pentatonic and blues with a motif that is first stated and then developed. It's really all just built around like an E-flat major triad and using E-flat major pentatonic, and then he develops it into this phrase. Before rounding it off with another blues phrase and a really nice polyphonic turnaround. And with the turnaround, you can really tell that he's thinking two independent layers. So you have sort of the sustained E-flat in the melody, and then the chords moving under it from C7 to F7, and then down to B-flat 7. And it's really clashing with the E-flat on top of that B-flat 7 chord. But that's also just a nice way to create some tension and a little bit a different way to go about it. There are two spots in the solo where Ed Bickert references the melody. Now, this first one is a really creative way to add a bit of blues sound to the melody and then also just use it to flow into another really great jazz blues lick. Check this out. So what he's doing here is actually pretty simple. He's harmonizing the melody in thirds. He's adding a third interval above it. So he's sliding into the G and has a B flat on top of that one. So, and then moving up to this for the C and adding a D flat above the B flat in the melody. Again, sliding into it just to get more of a blues sound. A nice detail is how he then keeps that idea in there by playing a single note line, but still emphasizing that high D flat in the second of the bars in the 2-bar phrase, which sort of works like an echo of the third interval idea. Later, there's also an example where he's using the melody of the song, but with some unusual but really beautiful open chord voicings. They kind of remind me a bit of Bill Evans. But first, let's look at a really nice line that isn't bebop and that actually sort of reminds me of Jim Hall. This example is an 8th note line, but it's not a bebop line. There's another logic behind the melody, and it continues into a really beautiful 2-5 with an altered dominant and a lot of offbeats. So you probably heard me talk about bebop lines and how they flow and move through the harmony and have sort of a lot of energy and a lot of forward motion. And this line starts out like that with what is essentially another blues line or jazz blues line like this. But then it goes on into this line that sort of has two layers, a high pedal note, which is a pedal point, which is a G, and then a lower part that's moving in half steps down from the sharp 11, the B, to the third. continuing into this 251, which has an F minor 7 arpeggio, and then moving on into what is essentially an E major pentatonic line over the B flat 7 altered, which is really a nice way to get that sound across. And this is a great example of creating rhythmic tension just before the end of a section, in this case the bridge of the song, so that you really feel that there's something that needs to resolve, and it does when we go back to the A part. What I think often is a topic with Ed Bickert, even to the point of overshadowing his playing, which I think is really a pity, is that he's primarily playing a Telecaster and was sort of one of the earliest mainstream jazz guitarists to have that as his main instrument. In interviews, he said that he got it because he needed it for studio work, kept using it because it was a little bit more in tune and easier to travel with. Now, ironically, he also said in an interview with Guitar Player that he found it difficult to get a useful tone out of it, that he often disliked how it quickly became muddy, comparing it to what he considered the ideal jazz tone with players like Jim Hall or George Benson. By now, with Bill Frisell, Ted Green and Julian Larch, we are kind of used to Telecasters as jazz guitars. What is maybe a bit more surprising to a lot is his choice of amp. From what I've been able to find out, that he often used a Roland Cube 60 as his main amp. And these old orange solid-state amps are pretty similar sounding to Polytone, but actually also a little bit brighter, and they actually sound really good. I have an older video on amps where I test one together with Joram Pinkston. If you want to hear that, then I'll link to it in the description of this video. That's already pretty much there as far as I'm concerned. They do really sound great. They don't weigh a lot, and they're also not super directional, which is actually very nice when you play live. Fender amps are often very directional and throw a lot of low-end frequencies out of the open back of the amp, which just gets in the way of the bass and the drums. So I really love the sound of Fender tube amps, but that aspect of the design is actually pretty horrible. Let's get to some chord soloing. These voicings are really beautiful, and I don't think I've heard anybody else use them in a chord solo. It's a pretty unique and, as I already said, amazing sound. Ed Bickert is, in this example, again quoting the theme. Check it out, it's pretty amazing. The chord voicing is kind of like a G minor triad with a C bass note, and he's of course using it over an E flat major 7, so with this bass note in the song, which is giving you sort of an E flat major 7 13, but it's a really great sound, and it's a lot more open because we have that large interval in there. He's using that to harmonize the G in the melody, so that will be the melody, and then for the A flat he's just moving that up a fret, and then on the high B flat he's playing this voicing. And actually this is pretty practical and not that difficult to play, while also sounding great, as you can hear. It's a lot more open sounding and very different from most chord solos which are using drop 2 or triad based chords. This somehow reminds me a bit of Bill Evans, but I can't really give you a specific place where he sounds like this. If you have any idea where Ed Bickert picked this up, then let me know about that in the comments. He also uses more standard chord voicings, but then for creating a different, more bluesy sound with a few outside options as well. Notice how he is relying on the same 3-note chordal voicing for all the dominants. So this one, that's sort of the foundation. And of course he's also using the same rhythm to tie it all together, but then he's adding different melody notes on top of the voicings and actually getting some pretty out there sounds while still remaining sort of in that blues sound. Check it out. So pretty simple. He's of course using the rhythm to tie it all together, so it makes it more of a riff that he's just sticking to that one rhythm for the first part of it. And he's sort of going E flat 7 to B flat 7 most of the time. Of course using sort of blues sound by using the sharp 9 and then going up to the 13. And this is what creates that blues sound, but it also fits with the original chords because they're just sort of moving up and down and going from tonic to, in this case, like a subdominant, but it could be anything. It's just tonic and then tension and then back to tonic. It's really just a way of interpreting that harmony. But then he's also adding some notes on top. So first, just this, then adding the B flat and the B, and then finally moving into this, which of course is an E flat 7 with a sharp 9 and a 13, into a D7, again, sharp 9, 13, G7, which is of course also with a sharp 9 and a 13, and then just down to a C7 sharp 9 before resolving to F minor 7. It's actually pretty easy to play, and if I remember correctly, then Lorne Lofsky does something very similar to this in his solo on It Could Happen to You. I'm guessing he got that from Ed Bickert. I really love how Ed Bickert is working with the harmony and improvising by changing the chords, as well as just creating solo lines on top of the chords. And this is just a 2-chorus solo on a very medium swing jazz standard. Now, even if this is not what most beginners are working on right away, then it is actually an important part of playing jazz and something that you want to be aware of and probably also explore. Another guitarist that has a beautiful and personal take on harmony is this guitarist, who also plays a solid body guitar and has a beautiful version of Days of Wine and Roses with a lot of amazing sounds. Check it out.